Hey guys, welcome back to another training video. In this video, what I'd like to do is show you how to set up the torch bottles for oxyacetylene cutting. Now, this isn't very different between if you were gonna maybe oxy weld, but we're only gonna be cutting in this class, so I'm only gonna be really teaching you to set it up for oxy cutting. Now, some of the things that I just wanted to say, and I'm not really going to show, are things like moving or transporting these bottles, because more than likely you're going to come out and the bottles are already going to be set up. So more than likely when you will use this information is when you have to maybe change out a bottle, or maybe just later on in your career you need to set up a set of bottles or something like that. So some of the things you need to know. If you're going to be moving bottles over 10 feet in distance, so you're going to be moving them across further than across the room, I should say, you're going to need to make sure you have a bottle cart. The difference between a bottle cart and, say, a non-bottle cart would be that a bottle cart has roll protection or fall protection. It would be pretty much a chain that could wrap around the bottle. So you want to make sure that it has some sort of roll protection. Also, these caps need to be in place. You're not allowed to be moving or transporting these bottles without caps. It's actually a pretty big deal. So you also do not want to lose those caps. It's one of those things that you and your boss are going to have problems with if you do. They're quite expensive, and then they can't even take your bottles to get them refilled because they don't have caps. So let's go ahead and we'll move right into actually setting up this torch. What we're going to do is we're going to pull off these caps. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'm going to show you how to set up each bottle one at a time, and we're going to talk about some of the specifics that are involved with that bottle and that maybe that regulator at that time. So let's go ahead. I'm going to pull this off. I'm going to start with the oxygen, and then we're going to move to the acetylene. Let's get started. Before we get too far into this, I wanted to say you should make sure to check over all of the equipment that you're going to be installing. Make sure that none of the hoses are burnt or scratched or have big old holes in them. Make sure that there's no cracks in any of the brass parts. Make sure that the gauges are nice and they're not beat up or melted. And just, before you get it put on and before you do the leak test, it's kind of like an easy way to find all those problems. Also, I wanted to say we are going to be using an 1 1/8" wrench and a 11/16" wrench. So you shouldn't need many other tools than that. So here we go. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is pull off this cap. Get that out of the way. The next thing we're going to do before we put on our regulator is we need to clean out the inside of this valve. So what we would do is we're just going to crack the valve quickly, let the the dirt and contaminants get blown out, and then we're going to go ahead and take our regulator and put it on. So let's go ahead and do that. One thing to notice is that there is a male fitting on this particular valve, while the acetylene will actually have a female fitting. So one thing to notice is that the oxygen will only fit onto this one. So we'll go ahead and we'll screw this on. You want to try to keep this one as straight as possible up and down. So when you're actually tightening it on, you might give it a little bit of a back set. That way when you tighten it, it gets pulled straight. The next thing we're going to need is we're going to need our 1 1/8" wrench. And we're going to go ahead and just tighten this one on. Perfect. So now we're ready to go to put on our hose. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drop down and we're going to do the acetylene really quick. All right, so we're going to get this cap off. Good. Now, this particular regulator is actually got a male fitting on it, so it's got a female fitting on the valve. We're just going to quickly crack this one really quick. On this regulator, there's some differences. It's going to have it's going to be left-handed threads. So there's something I want to point out to you. You can see that on this nut, they are actually got little notches. These little notches mean that it's left-handed, okay? So hopefully you guys can see those little notches right there. So any more of like a flammable liquid, things like propane or acetylene, they're going to have left-handed threads. So they're going to have these kind of wrench flats on them, okay? So let's go ahead and we'll put that on real quick and get back to this. All right, so we're going to go ahead and screw that in. Again, we're going to take our 1 1/8" and we're going to go ahead and tighten that down. Perfect. So now we got our hoses, and that would be the next thing that we have. Again, color coding is very important with oxyacetylene. Oxygen will be the green and acetylene will be the red. Now, same is true when you have your hoses. So first, I want to point out that one, this cap does not have any notches in it, while this one does. So right there, we know that this one's left-handed again. So also it's red and there's a green one. So we're gonna go ahead and hook these up to the correct regulators, and it's gonna take about 11/16 wrench to do that. So we're gonna go ahead and put those on. All right, so now we need to hook up our torch. All right, so I got my torch. Now the torch is actually really two pieces, and we're gonna have our cutting head and then our body mixing chamber, all right? Now again, we're gonna be able to look at our body mixing chamber, see that there are two threaded ports. One is left-handed, one is right. Also, one should have an F that stands for fuel, which will be your acetylene or propane, or you might have natural gas or something like that, depending on what type of stuff you use. The other one will have an O for oxygen. Now, one very important thing, these two will connect, and it honestly looks like a wrench or a hex head here. And it actually, because it is a wrench or a hex head. This right here. Now this will be a hand-tight connection here, so make sure that when you are connecting it, you are only doing this with your hand. Never put a wrench on any of this torch here, okay? Otherwise, it's all brass, and you'll just go ahead and rip the threads out or totally crush the O-ring surfaces, all right? So now that I've got my torch all set up, and we're gonna go over this a little bit more in the next video, I'm gonna go ahead and put my hoses on here. So we'll just go ahead and grab those and put them on. All right, so now that the torch is hooked up, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through the procedure to actually turn on the oxygen and acetylene, and then we're gonna leak test the whole system. So the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna make sure we've turned off both of these valves, the oxygen and the acetylene, and we're gonna go ahead and move to the actual bottles. All right, so what we have here is we've got our valve that's gonna turn on the bottle, and then we have one gauge here that's going to tell us what's inside of the bottle, and then this gauge here is going to be telling us what is heading out to that torch. So what we're going to do, this is all the way backed off. You're supposed to back it off when you go ahead and pull these off. That way there's no load against that diaphragm at any time. So we're going to go ahead and turn this on. Notice that I'm again behind the valve so that if this was to blow off or something was hooked on there incorrectly, I could not get hurt. So we're going to go ahead and turn this on. Notice it starts showing up on this gauge here first. There should be nothing on this other one. I turned this valve all the way on. This is a very important process right here, all the way on. There's a lot of different valves throughout the whole shop. Most of them are turned all the way on, but there's a few that are only turned on a little bit. And we're gonna do that because the oxyacetylene is one of them. So we're gonna go over that in a second. What we're gonna do is we now have oxygen in this gauge right here, but we need it over here and we need to pressurize that whole line. So we're gonna start turning this in. And you can see, in a second, we're gonna start moving the needle. Now, one thing that's very important is the inside of this gauge is gonna have PSI and the outside has bar. So we need to be using PSI because this is America and that's what we use. So you're gonna go ahead and look to that inside one, and I would turn it to about 20 PSI. Which we're actually about a little bit over that right now. So we're gonna need to bleed some out, but I'll do that off camera. We'll go ahead and move down to the acetylene. All right, so on this one, like I said, it's a little bit different. We're gonna go ahead and turn on this valve until it shows up on this gauge, but no more than a turn and a half, all right? So we're gonna go ahead and start. See, it started showing. I'm gonna do a little bit more just in case, because you can get it to move, but then it's not open enough to actually let any acetylene actually travel out. So we're gonna go ahead and just open it a little bit more, but no more than a turn and a half on this guy. When we are using our acetylene, we never want to go over 15 psi of line pressure because it's dangerous. At that point, if we dropped a hammer on it, stepped really hard, it potentially could blow up. So now all of our lines are pressurized except for this going down to the torch. So we're going to start screwing this one in, and depending on what you're working on, what kind of torch you have, or using a rosebud, cutting tip, welding tip, you're going to determine what psi. But I'm going to put them at 6 right now because that's where I usually run my cutting torch at. So let's go ahead and set it to 6, and now we can leak test all of our joints. Alright, so now all we need to do is go through and leak test all of our joints. We're just going to be using some soapy water. Literally, this is just Dawn soap and some water shook up in a spray bottle, okay? So what I'm going to do is go to every joint and just shoot them all down, okay? It's good to do every possible joint on this section, where all like the gauges hook in. It's even good to do the bottle valve. Get all of that, and then you want to make sure that you do get over to your torch and you hit up all of these connections, and you're just really looking for some expanded bubbles. Let me go ahead and I want to show you a clip of what it would look like if they were leaking. Notice that the bubbles are very big, while some of the ones that when it's not leaking are actually pretty small. So I didn't know what bubbles should look like when they were leaking for the longest time until I found one that was bad. So just look for this and you should be good. All right, so that completes our video on oxyacetylene setup. If you guys got any questions or need some help when you first get out into the shop, please let me know. Otherwise, good luck.